The great chamber of the Galactic Council shook with angry voices as Admiral Zephyr slammed his forearm fist against the metal table. The holographic display showed red marks across 3 entire sectors where Vorthan Empire ships had broken through their defenses like they were made of paper. Each red mark meant millions of lives lost and entire worlds burning under enemy fire. "We cannot continue like this," Zephyr growled through his translator device. "Our best computers have failed us, and our greatest military minds cannot predict what these Vorthans will do next." The other council members shifted in their seats with worry clear on their alien faces. General Thane from the Crystal Worlds tapped his glass fingers nervously, while Commander Vex from the gas giant colonies floated higher in his breathing tank. They had all seen the reports, and they all knew the truth that nobody wanted to say out loud. They were losing the war. "Perhaps we should surrender," whispered Ambassador Krill from her corner seat. "The Vorthans have offered terms, and maybe saving some lives is better than losing them all." The chamber erupted in angry shouts and protests, but Zephyr raised his hand for silence. He had been thinking about something for days now, and the idea made his stomach turn with disgust. But desperate times called for desperate actions. "There is one option we have not tried," he said slowly. "We could ask the humans for help." The silence that followed was so complete that even the air recycling system seemed to stop working. Ambassador Krill dropped her datapad, while General Thane made a sound like breaking glass. The humans were still new to the galactic community, and most species saw them as violent primitives who solved everything by hitting it harder. "The humans," repeated Commander Vex, with disbelief dripping from his voice box. "You want to ask those warmongers to help us fight a war. They are good at fighting," Zephyr admitted. "Their military record speaks for itself, even if we find their methods crude and barbaric. But they are so young and wild," protested General Thane. "They have only been in space for a few decades, while we have been fighting wars for thousands of years." Zephyr pulled up a new display showing human military achievements from their home system. The numbers were impressive even if the tactics seemed chaotic and unpredictable. The humans had won every major conflict they had ever fought, and they did it with weapons and strategies that made no sense to civilized minds. "Look at these records," Zephyr said, pointing to the data. "They ended their resource wars in 6 months when everyone predicted it would take years. They defended their home system against impossible odds and won. Maybe chaos is exactly what we need against the Vorthans." The debate went on for hours with voices rising and falling like ocean waves. Some council members argued that humans were too dangerous to trust, while others pointed out that they were already losing everything anyway. Finally, a vote was called, and by the smallest possible margin, the decision was made. They would ask Earth for help. The message was sent through the fastest communication channels available, and the response came back within 2 days. Earth military. Command agreed to send assistance, but their choice surprised everyone. Instead of sending one of their famous generals or admirals, they were sending someone called Commander Jake Morrison. Nobody had heard of him. When Morrison arrived at the council flagship 3 days later, he looked nothing like what anyone expected. He was a normal-looking human male in his early 40s with brown hair and tired eyes. He carried only a small bag and an old notebook that looked like it had seen better days. There were no medals on his simple uniform and no signs that he was anyone special. The welcoming ceremony was awkward and brief. Morrison shook hands with the various council leaders and answered their questions with short, simple replies. When asked about his experience, he mentioned a few minor conflicts that nobody recognized. When asked about his strategy, he said he needed to study the situation first. Admiral Zephyr felt his hulk sinking like a stone. This ordinary-looking human was supposed to save them from the greatest military threat the galaxy had ever seen. It seemed impossible, and probably was. First briefing session went even worse than expected. Morrison sat quietly while the council military leaders explained their situation, using complex tactical displays and detailed battle reports. He asked basic questions about supply lines and troop movements that any first-year military student would know. His notebook remained closed, and he took no electronic notes. "Do you have any initial thoughts, Commander?" asked Zephyr, trying to hide his disappointment. Morrison looked around the room at all the alien faces staring at him with barely hidden doubt. "I need to see all your battle records from the past 6 months," he said quietly. "Every engagement and every report you have. Our computers have already analyzed all that data," General Thane replied with irritation clear in his voice. "They found no useful patterns. I am not a computer," Morrison said, standing up from his chair. "I need to see how they think before I can tell you how to beat them." As the human walked out of the briefing room, the council leaders exchanged worried glances. They had asked for a strategist and gotten what looked like a clerk with a notebook. The war was getting worse every day, and their last hope appeared to be a man who asked questions that children could answer. None of them knew that they had just met a legend. Jake Morrison spent the entire night in his small quarters reading battle reports and making notes in his worn notebook. The council computer systems offered him every advanced analysis tool available, but he ignored them all. Instead, he spread paper charts across his desk and drew lines between events that happened months apart in different sectors. His door chimed at dawn, but he did not answer. Food trays appeared outside his room, but he barely touched them. By the second day, worried staff members reported seeing lights in his windows at all hours and hearing him talking to himself in low voices. On the third morning, Morrison finally emerged looking tired but focused. His notebook was now filled with diagrams and calculations that would have looked like random scribbles to anyone else. He requested an immediate meeting with the council military leadership, and this time his demeanor was completely different. "The Vorthans are not fighting the war you think they are fighting," Morrison announced as soon as everyone had gathered. "You have been trying to win battles while they have been destroying your ability to fight at all." Admiral Zephyr frowned and activated the tactical display. "What do you mean, Commander?" "They attack our fleets, and we defend our territory just like any normal conflict." Morrison pulled out his notebook and opened it to a page covered with interconnected circles and arrows. "Look at their target selection over the past 6 months. They are not going after your strongest positions or your most valuable worlds. They are hitting supply depots, manufacturing centers, and communication relays. Those are secondary targets," protested General Thane. "Any competent military force protects their logistics, but the real fighting happens between fleets." "That is exactly what they want you to think," Morrison replied, walking to the display controls. "Every time you move ships to protect a supply depot, they hit 3 others. Every time you reinforce a manufacturing world, they destroy the transport routes that connect it to your fleets. They are not trying to beat you in battle. They are trying to make it impossible for you to fight battles at all." Morrison began highlighting locations on the star map, and suddenly a pattern emerged that made everyone in the room fall silent. The Vorthan attacks that had seemed random and chaotic were actually following a careful plan to cut the council forces into isolated groups that could not support each other. "This is impossible," whispered Commander Vex. "Our analysis computers would have detected such a pattern. Your computers look for military patterns," Morrison explained. "This is not a military strategy. This is economic warfare disguised as fleet actions. They are destroying your economy and letting your military collapse on its own." Admiral Zephyr studied the display with growing alarm. If Morrison was right, then every defensive strategy they had used was not just wrong but actively helpful to the enemy. "How do we stop them?" Morrison closed his notebook and looked around the room. "We make them fight the war they do not want to fight. Tomorrow they will attack the Kepler Station supply convoy according to their pattern. I want to be there when they do. That convoy is defended by only 6 ships," General Thane objected. "The Vorthans will send at least 20 vessels. It would be suicide to engage them. Not if we are not there to fight ships," Morrison said with a thin smile. "Give me command of 12 fast attack vessels, and I will show you something your computers never considered." The request sparked another heated debate, but Admiral Zephyr was desperate enough to try anything. Morrison was given command of a small fleet and orders to intercept the Vorthin attack on the supply convoy. Most of the council leaders expected to receive news of his death within hours. Instead, Morrison did something that shocked everyone. When the Vorthin fleet arrived at the convoy location, they found it completely empty except for automated beacons broadcasting surrender messages. Confused but victorious, the Vorthins moved to their next target only to discover that Morrison had predicted that location too. For 3 days, Morrison led the Vorthin fleet on a chase through empty space while striking at targets they had left undefended. He used their own strategy against them by hitting supply depots and communication stations, while they hunted for battles that never materialized. By the end of the week, the Vorthin commander had lost more ships to equipment failures than enemy fire, but Morrison was just getting started. Using captured Vorthin communication equipment, he began broadcasting false reports about massive council reinforcements arriving in 6 different sectors. The psychological warfare was devastatingly effective as Vorthin fleet commanders started requesting permission to withdraw from positions they could easily hold. When Morrison returned to the council, flagship Admiral Zephyr was waiting with questions and growing respect. "How did you predict their movements so accurately?" "I have seen this before," Morrison replied simply. "During our resource wars on Earth, one side tried the same strategy. It works until someone recognizes what they are doing and turns it back on them." That evening, Admiral Zephyr conducted a private investigation into Morrison background using Earth diplomatic channels. What he discovered made him understand why Earth had sent this seemingly ordinary man. Jake Morrison was not just any human officer. He was the architect of humanity's greatest military victories. Morrison had planned the defense of the Sol system that saved Earth from invasion. He had designed the liberation campaign that freed Europa colonies from occupation. He had written the tactical doctrine that ended the resource wars in 6 months instead of the predicted 6 years. On Earth, he was known by another name that struck fear into the hearts of his enemies. They called him the Ghost. Morrison had specifically requested this assignment, telling Earth Command that the galaxy needed to see what humans could really do when pushed to their limits. He had come not as a simple advisor, but as proof that human strategic thinking could overcome any challenge. Word of Morrison, successes began to spread through both Council and Vorthin forces. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know about the human who fought like a force of nature and won battles without firing shots. His reputation was growing, but so was the danger he represented. The Vorthin plans in the depths of enemy. Space Vorthin High Command was receiving reports that their carefully planned campaign was falling apart because of one human strategist. They made a decision that would change everything. They assigned their best operative to eliminate Morrison personally. Warlord Krashnev was coming, and he had never failed a mission. Morrison stood in the command center of the Council flagship, studying intelligence reports about Vorthin fleet movements when Admiral Zephyr approached with news that made the human commander pause. Warlord Krashnev had been assigned to hunt him personally and was already moving through Vorthin space with a specialized fleet designed for one purpose. Krashnev has never failed a mission, Zephyr warned. He destroyed 3 rebel fleets during the Outer Rim Uprising and eliminated the leadership of the Free Colonies Resistance. His ships are faster than ours, and his weapons are more advanced. Morrison nodded and made a note in his ever-present notebook. How long before he reaches our position? Intelligence estimates 4 days at maximum speed, replied Zephyr. Perhaps. We should withdraw to a more defended position. No, Morrison said, closing his notebook. Running away only gives him time to set up the perfect trap. We need to take the initiative before he gets organized. Morrison gathered his command staff and outlined a plan that sounded completely insane. He wanted to launch an immediate attack on a heavily defended Vorthin supply convoy in the Kepler Nebula using only the ships currently available. The target was protected by orbital defense platforms and a full squadron of enemy vessels. This is suicide, protested Captain Blake from the destroyer Lightning. Those defenses were designed to stop entire fleets, and we have barely enough. Ships for a reconnaissance mission. The defenses are designed to stop conventional attacks, Morrison corrected. We are not going to attack conventionally. Morrison activated the tactical display and showed the asteroid field that surrounded the supply depot. Most commanders saw the asteroids as obstacles to navigate around, but Morrison saw them as weapons waiting to be used. His plan involved coordinating the fleet movement to create a cascade effect that would turn the entire field into a massive kinetic bombardment. The concept was brilliant, but required perfect timing and precise navigation through a maze of spinning rocks. One mistake would destroy their own ships instead of the enemy targets. Several alien officers questioned whether humans were crazy enough to attempt such a dangerous maneuver. "We are," Morrison said with a grim smile. "That is exactly why this will work." The attack began at dawn ship time with Morrison personally leading the assault in the fast cruiser Defiance. His fleet moved into the asteroid field in tight formation while Vorthan sensors tracked their approach. With growing confusion, the enemy expected the ships to emerge from the field and attack their platforms directly. Instead, Morrison ordered his ships to fire their main guns at specific asteroids while maintaining their trajectory through the field. The impact sent massive rocks spinning toward other asteroids, which collided with more rocks in an ever-expanding chain reaction. Within minutes, the entire field was moving like a giant machine designed to crush everything in its path. The Vorthan defenders found themselves facing not enemy ships, but an avalanche of stone and metal that their weapons could not stop. Defense. Platforms were smashed by rocks the size of buildings, while enemy vessels fled in panic as asteroids rained down around them. The supply depot was destroyed without Morrison's fleet firing a single shot at the actual target, but Morrison was far from finished with his psychological warfare campaign. Instead of celebrating the victory, he immediately split his fleet into 3 groups and sent them to different locations using captured Vorthan communication codes. Each group broadcast fake reports about massive council reinforcements arriving. With advanced new weapons, the effect was devastating to Vorthan morale. Within hours, 6 different enemy fleets had requested permission to withdraw from their positions rather than face the mysterious human commander and his phantom reinforcements. Entire star systems were abandoned without firing a shot as panic spread through Vorthan ranks like a plague. Morrison had turned fear itself into a weapon more powerful than any ship or gun. His reputation among both Council and Vorthan forces was growing beyond anything seen in modern warfare. Soldiers on both sides began telling stories about the human who could predict the future and fight like a force of nature. The victory at Kepler Nebula proved to the Council leadership that Morrison was not just another military advisor. He was something completely new in galactic warfare. A strategist who understood that winning battles meant nothing if you could make the enemy defeat themselves instead. Admiral Zephyr received reports from across the front lines about Vorthan commanders becoming increasingly paranoid and defensive. They were seeing Morrison influence in every Council action, even when he was nowhere near the battle. The human had become larger than life in the minds of his enemies, but Morrison knew that his growing reputation came with a price. Intelligence reports confirmed that Warlord Krasnev was getting closer and had begun studying every battle Morrison had fought. The Vorthan hunter was patient and methodical, while Morrison preferred quick strikes and psychological pressure. "He is learning how I think," Morrison told Zephyr during a private briefing. "That makes him dangerous in ways that conventional enemies are not." Morrison made a decision that shocked his command staff. He announced that he would be splitting his consciousness between multiple ships, using advanced human neural interface technology. The procedure was experimental and dangerous, but it would allow him to command several fleets simultaneously while making it nearly impossible for Krasnev to target him directly. "You could die," warned Dr. Lisa Grant from the medical staff. The human brain was not designed to control multiple bodies at the same time. "The human brain was not designed for a lot of things we do," Morrison replied. "But we do them anyway because they need to be done. The neural interface procedure took place in the medical bay under tight security. Morrison consciousness was connected to command centers on 5 different ships, allowing him to experience multiple battles at the same time. The technology worked, but the strain was enormous. When the procedure was complete, Morrison opened his eyes on 5 different ships simultaneously and spoke with 5 different voices. "Let Krasnev come," he said through all of them at once. "I will show him what happens when you hunt a legend." The news that Morrison had multiplied himself spread through both fleets like wildfire. Council forces felt invincible, knowing their commander could be everywhere at once, while Vorthan soldiers whispered that the human had become something beyond mortal understanding. Krasnev received the reports with cold calculation. His target had become more dangerous, but also more vulnerable. If he could find a way to disrupt the neural connections, Morrison would be helpless. The hunt was about to become much more interesting. Warlord Krasnev emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Centauri system with a fleet designed specifically for hunting one target. His ships were equipped with neural disruption weapons and advanced tracking systems that could detect human brainwave patterns across vast distances. Every vessel in his squadron had studied Morrison tactics and prepared countermeasures for his most successful strategies. Krasnev was everything the Vorthan Empire valued in a military leader. He was methodical, where Morrison was chaotic patient, where the human was aggressive and absolutely loyal, where Morrison fought for principles that changed with circumstances. The two commanders represented completely different philosophies of warfare. Morrison detected Krasnev's arrival through sensor networks across 5 different ships, but he did not flee or hide. Instead, he began implementing the most audacious plan of his career. Using his neural interface connections, he started coordinating multiple fleets in what appeared to be a massive retreat from Vorthan advance forces. "He is running," reported Krasnev intelligence officer with satisfaction. "All Council fleets are withdrawing toward the core systems," but Krasnev was too experienced to believe that Morrison would simply flee without purpose. He studied the retreat patterns carefully and noticed that the Council forces were not running randomly. They were moving through systems with large civilian populations and important infrastructure that the Vorthans needed intact. Morrison was turning his entire retreat into a recruitment campaign. Every system his fleets passed through saw small acts of tactical brilliance that saved lives and protected innocent people. He rescued civilian convoys from Vorthan raiders, liberated prisoner camps that others had written off as lost causes, and turned enemy strongholds into symbols of resistance. The psychological effect was devastating to Vorthan morale. Soldiers who had signed up to conquer weak enemies found themselves fighting a legend who seemed to care more about protecting others than winning battles. Desertion rates began climbing as Vorthan troops questioned whether their cause was worth fighting against someone who embodied everything they had been told their enemies lacked. Krasnev realized that Morrison was not just retreating, but transforming the entire nature of the conflict. The human was making the war about more than territory or resources. He was making it about hope versus despair and freedom versus oppression. "Clever," Krasnev admitted to his staff. "He knows he cannot defeat us in direct combat, so he is trying to defeat us politically." The chase continued through 12 star systems, with Krasnev forces always one step behind Morrison rapidly moving fleets. The Vorthan commander began to understand that he was not hunting one man, but fighting an idea that had taken human form. Morrison had become a symbol that inspired resistance everywhere he appeared. The pursuit finally reached the ruins of the Centauri shipyards, where an ancient battle had left massive construction facilities drifting in space like mechanical graveyards. Morrison had been preparing this battlefield for weeks while Krasnev chased him across the galaxy. "He has nowhere left to run," Krasnev announced as his fleet surrounded the shipyard complex. "The human is trapped." Morrison opened communication channels to the Vorthan fleet from all 5 of his ships simultaneously, creating an eerie effect where his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "I am not trapped, Krasnev. You are exactly where I want you to be." The battle that followed became legendary throughout the galaxy for its sheer audacity and tactical brilliance. Morrison used the shipyard construction equipment as improvised, weapons turning massive cranes into kinetic bombardment systems and industrial lasers into defensive batteries. The facility artificial gravity generators became tactical advantages as Morrison altered local gravity fields to redirect enemy fire and trap Vorten ships in areas where they could not maneuver. Krasnev found himself fighting not just Morrison ships but the entire shipyard complex, which had been turned into a massive weapon system. Every piece of abandoned equipment became a threat as Morrison demonstrated the human ability to see weapons and tools and opportunities in obstacles. Climactic moment came when Krasnev's flagship was caught in a gravity trap, created by 3 industrial generators working in concert. His ship was pulled into a maze of construction scaffolding where his superior weapons meant nothing because he could not get clear shots at his targets. Morrison appeared on Krasnev's view screen, speaking from the bridge of the cruiser, Defiance. As debris from the battle rained around both ships, "You fought well, Krasnev, but you made one mistake. You assumed I was fighting to win battles when I was actually fighting to win hearts and minds." Krasnev's ship was dying around him as critical systems failed from the sustained bombardment. His crew was abandoning their posts as the hull began to crack under pressure. But the Vorten commander had one final question for his opponent. "Why do you fight so hard for species that showed you no respect when you arrived?" Krasnev asked, as his ship system sparked and failed. "They called you primitive and questioned your every decision." Morrison was quiet for a moment as explosions lit up the space around them. "Respect is earned through actions, not demanded through force. I do not fight for their approval, Krasnev. I fight because it is the right thing to do." Krasnev closed his eyes as his ship's final systems failed and the hull began to crack apart. In his last moments, he understood something about humans that the Vorten Empire had never grasped. They did not fight because they enjoyed war. They fought because they believed some things were worth dying for. The destruction of Krasnev's fleet sent shockwaves through the Vorten Empire. Their greatest hunter had been defeated by a human who turned industrial equipment into weapons and made battlefield tactics from gravity generators. The loss was not just military, but psychological, as the myth of Vorten superiority began to crumble. Morrison gathered his fleets at the edge of the Centauri system and addressed his forces through multiple communication channels. Krasnev was everything the Vorten Empire believes makes a perfect soldier: loyal, obedient, and ruthlessly efficient. "We just proved that sometimes the best weapon against perfection is someone who refuses to follow the rules." The victory at Centauri marked a turning point in the war, but Morrison knew that the real battle was just beginning. Intelligence reports indicated that the Vorten Empire was preparing for a massive counterattack using forces they had kept in reserve. The enemy was about to show their true strength, but Morrison had learned something important during his battle with Krasnev. The Vorten Empire was not as united as they appeared. Cracks were showing in their leadership, and their soldiers were beginning to question orders that sent them against an enemy who fought for principles rather than conquest. Legend was growing, and soon it would become something that no empire could defeat. The victory over Krasnev sent ripples of doubt through the Vorten Empire that Morrison intended to turn into a tsunami of revolution. Intelligence reports confirmed that several Vorten sectors were experiencing communication blackouts and supply shortages as their command structures struggled to maintain control over increasingly questioning troops. Morrison called an emergency meeting of all council military leaders to propose his most ambitious operation yet. Operation Cascade would involve simultaneous attacks on 7 different Vorten systems coordinated across multiple sectors with perfect timing. The plan required cooperation from over 40 different species, each contributing their unique abilities to a master strategy. "This is impossible," protested General Thane as he studied the tactical displays. "We have never coordinated operations on this scale, and the timing requirements are beyond anything our systems can handle." Morrison opened his worn notebook to pages filled with detailed calculations and species profiles. Our systems cannot handle it, but we can. Every species in the Council has strengths that others lack. We just need to match the right abilities to the right tasks. The plan Morrison presented was a masterpiece of cultural and military understanding. He assigned the methodical Altarians to handle supply logistics because their patient nature made them perfect for managing complex delivery schedules. The aggressive Cordon warrior clans would lead frontal assaults where their battle fury could overwhelm enemy positions. The telepathic Etherean scouts would provide real-time intelligence using their mental connections to coordinate information across vast distances. Each species received assignments that played to their natural advantages while covering for their weaknesses through cooperation with others. The diversity that had always been the Council's greatest challenge became their ultimate weapon under Morrison's strategic vision. Admiral Zephyr studied the operational requirements with growing amazement. "How did you learn so much about our different cultures and abilities?" I asked questions and listened to the answers. Morrison replied simply, "Most commanders focus on weapons and tactics, but wars are won by understanding people, the preparation." For Operation Cascade pushed Morrison to his absolute limits. He coordinated battles across thousands of light years, while maintaining diplomatic relations with dozens of Council members who still questioned his methods. The neural interface connections allowed him to be present at multiple planning sessions simultaneously, but the strain was enormous. Morrison began working 18-hour days surviving on stimulants and pure determination as he refined every detail of the massive operation. His staff watched with growing concern as the human commander pushed himself beyond what seemed physically possible for any organic being. Dr. Grant warned that the neural strain could cause permanent damage or even death, but Morrison refused to slow down. "If this operation fails, the war continues for years and millions more die. I can handle a few headaches." The Seven-Front War began exactly on schedule with Morrison consciousness split between command centers on different ships in different sectors. His ability to coordinate multiple battles simultaneously gave the Council forces unprecedented tactical flexibility as they adapted to changing conditions in real time. The Altarian supply lines delivered ammunition and reinforcements exactly when needed, while coordinating assault teams broke through enemy defenses with brutal efficiency. Etherean scouts provided intelligence so accurate that Council commanders could predict enemy movements before they happened. But the real genius of Operation Cascade was not military, but psychological. Morrison had designed the attacks to force the Vorthan Empire into an impossible situation. They could not defend 7 systems simultaneously without pulling their reserve fleets from core sectors, leaving their most important worlds vulnerable for the first time in decades. The Vorthan High Command faced a choice between losing 7 strategic systems or exposing their capital sector to potential attack. Either decision would demonstrate that their empire was not as invincible as they claimed. Morrison monitored enemy communications through intercepted signals and watched as panic spread through Vorthan leadership. Their careful plans for gradual expansion were collapsing as they found themselves fighting a war on terms they had never anticipated. "They are pulling ships from the core sectors," reported Admiral Zephyr during one of Morrison's brief rest periods. "Intelligence confirms that at least 12 fleet groups have been redirected to counter our operations." Morrison looked up from his tactical displays with exhaustion clear in his eyes, but satisfaction in his voice. "Perfect. That is exactly what we needed them to do." The strain of commanding 7 simultaneous battles was taking its toll on Morrison's physical and mental health. His hands shook from stimulant overuse, and his speech sometimes slurred from exhaustion. But he continued pushing forward because he could see the end of the war approaching. On the 10th day of Operation Cascade, Morrison called an emergency session of the Council leadership. Intelligence reports showed that the Vorthan capital sector was now defended by only minimal forces as their military had been stretched across the galaxy trying to contain the multi-front assault. "We have a choice," Morrison announced to the assembled leaders. We can continue this grinding campaign that will eventually lead to victory in 6 months to a year. Or we can risk everything on one final operation that could end the war in weeks. The proposal Morrison presented was audacious beyond belief. He wanted to launch a direct assault on the Vorthan homeworld using a small fleet of the fastest ships in the galaxy. The plan required penetrating deep into enemy territory with no support and no possibility of retreat. This is suicide, whispered Commander Vex. Even if we reach their homeworld, what can a small fleet accomplish against an entire planet? Morrison closed his notebook and looked around the room at faces representing dozens of different species, who had learned to trust his impossible strategies. We are not going there to destroy their world. We are going there to give their people something they have never had before. What is that? Asked Admiral Zephyr. Morrison smiled despite his exhaustion. Hope. The vote was closer than any previous decision, but desperation and faith in Morrison. Track record won the day. The Council approved the most dangerous operation in galactic history with the understanding that failure would mean not just military defeat, but the complete destruction of their remaining forces. Morrison began handpicking volunteers for what everyone understood would be a one-way mission to the heart of the Vorthan Empire. Every species in the Council provided their best pilots and soldiers for an operation that would either end the war or end them all. The final battle was coming, and with it the ultimate test of everything. Morrison had learned about warfare leadership and the power of hope to overcome despair. Morrison stood in the hangar bay of the assault ship Defiance as volunteers from 50 different species prepared for what everyone knew would be the most dangerous mission in galactic history. The small fleet consisted of only 12 ships, but each vessel had been modified with the latest stealth technology and crewed by the best pilots the Council could provide. Among the volunteers was Lieutenant Amy Carter, a brilliant human engineer, who had designed the specialized modifications that would allow their ships to penetrate Vorthan space undetected. Captain Rex Thompson Morrison, longtime friend, commanded the lead assault vessel, while representatives from dozens of species brought their unique abilities to the desperate mission. We are not going to Nexus Prime to destroy their world, Morrison addressed the mixed crew through communication systems. We are going there to show the Vorthan people what their leaders have hidden from them for decades. The truth about their empire and the cost of endless war. The journey to the Vorthan homeworld took 6 days through hyperspace routes that avoid all known patrol areas. Morrison's neural interface allowed him to coordinate the small fleet movement while monitoring intelligence reports from the ongoing battles. Across 7 sectors, the multi-front war continued to drain Vorthan resources as their scattered fleets struggled to contain Council advances. Every day that passed saw more enemy ships pulled away from the core systems, leaving the capital sector increasingly vulnerable to the kind of surgical strike Morrison had planned when they emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Nexus Prime system. The volunteers found themselves facing orbital defenses that could have destroyed entire fleets. Massive battle stations surrounded the Vorthan homeworld like mechanical moons, while patrol ships moved in perfect formations between defensive platforms. How do we get through that? Whispered Captain Thompson as he stared at displays showing thousands of enemy vessels. Morrison activated the stealth systems Amy Carter had designed and watched as their ships disappear from all sensor readings. We do not fight our way through Rex. We walk right past them like we belong here. The infiltration of Nexus Prime defenses became a masterpiece of deception and timing. Using captured Vorthan identification codes and false supply manifests, Morrison fleet posed as routine cargo vessels delivering resources to the homeworld. The stealth modifications made their ships appear exactly like standard Vorthan transports on all scanner readings. But Morrison's real genius was not technical but psychological. He had spent months studying Vorthan culture and society through intercepted communications and prisoner interviews. He understood that their empire was built on lies told to keep the population obedient and afraid of the outside galaxy. The 12 ships reached orbit around Nexus Prime without firing a single shot or triggering any alarms. Morrison had proven that the heart of the Vorthan Empire was not as well protected as their leaders claimed. Now came the moment that would determine whether the war ended in victory or disaster. Instead of attacking military targets or government buildings, Morrison ordered his ships to broadcast a message across every communication channel on the planet. The transmission was not a demand for surrender or a threat of destruction. It was something far more dangerous to the Vorthan. Leadership thought it was the truth. The broadcast began with captured recordings of Vorthan leaders discussing their citizens as expendable resources and their military as tools for personal power rather than planetary defense. Morrison had compiled evidence showing how the Empire wealth was concentrated among a small elite, while ordinary people lived in poverty despite conquering dozens of worlds. But the most devastating part of the message was not about Vorthan corruption, but about the galaxy beyond their borders. Morrison showed recordings of council worlds where different species lived together in peace and prosperity. He presented evidence that the council had no interest in conquering the Vorthan people, but wanted only to end the aggressive expansion that threatened everyone. The psychological effect was amplified by Etherian telepaths who used their mental abilities to project emotions of hope and possibility directly into the minds of Vorthan citizens. For the first time in generations, the people of Nexus Prime experienced feelings that their government had tried to suppress. Riots began within. Hours as millions of Vorthan citizens took to the streets demanding answers from their leaders. The Empire military found itself facing not external enemies, but their own people, who had finally learned the truth about the war they had been forced to fight. Morrison watched from orbit as the carefully constructed lies that held the Vorthan Empire together crumbled like sand castles in a storm. His broadcast had not destroyed their military or conquered their territory. It had given their people something far more powerful than weapons. It had given them hope. The revolution that followed was swift and decisive, as Vorthan citizens overthrew the government that had lied to them for decades. Military units that had been ordered to fire on protesters instead joined the uprising as soldiers realized they had been fighting for leaders who saw them as disposable tools. Within days, the Vorthan Empire ceased to exist as a political entity. In its place arose a new government, chosen by the people who immediately requested negotiations with the Galactic Council. The war that had seemed impossible to win was over, not through destruction, but through transformation. Morrison received offers of every honor the Council could bestow, including permanent positions and titles that would have made him one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy. He declined them all and asked only for transport back to Earth. "Why are you leaving at the height of your legend?" Admiral Zephyr asked during their final meeting. "You could shape the future of galactic civilization." Morrison looked out at the stars through the viewport of the Council flagship and smiled with quiet satisfaction. Legends work best when they know when to step aside. The galaxy does not need Jake Morrison telling them what to do. They need to learn that they can save themselves. The journey back to Earth took 2 weeks, and Morrison spent most of it sleeping as his body recovered from months of neural interface strain and stimulant use. When he finally arrived at his small apartment, the legendary commander who had saved the galaxy simply resumed his quiet life as a military instructor. But the galaxy had been changed forever by what Morrison had accomplished. The former Vorthan worlds joined the Council as free members, bringing new technologies and perspectives that enriched everyone. The war that had threatened to destroy galactic civilization had instead brought different species closer together than ever before. Most importantly, Morrison had proven that the greatest victories came not from superior weapons or tactical brilliance, but from refusing to accept that winning was impossible. He had shown that sometimes the best way to defeat an enemy was to help them defeat themselves by revealing the truth they had been hiding from. Years later, when young cadets from dozens of species arrived at Earth Military Academy, they all hoped to learn from the human who had saved the galaxy. Morrison taught them tactics and strategy, but his most important lesson was simpler than any battle plan. Wars are not won by generals or admirals. he would tell each new class. They are won by ordinary people who decide that some things are worth fighting for and refuse to give up until everyone can live in peace. The legend of Jake Morrison spread throughout the galaxy, but the man himself remained exactly what he had always been. A quiet teacher who understood that true victory meant everyone got to go home.